Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is episode 20, Long Story Short. I'm Sarah.
I'm Tessa, and this is Checked Out with Green Hills Public Library.
Today, we have Stephanie joining us from the Adult Services Department. I spend many desk shifts with Stephanie, so I'm really excited to have her here for us to talk about short stories, short story collections, novellas, and poetry, because Stephanie is a big fan of poetry. So without further ado, Stephanie, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do here at Green Hills?
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I work with Sarah at the Adult Services desk. I help patrons find anything and everything they're looking for. One of my favorite things is reader advisory. I love hearing what people are looking for, and I also sometimes find things that I wouldn't have found otherwise. I love building community with our patrons. I like being on a first name basis with them. Yeah, so that's what I love the most.
You've been working at libraries for a little while. What is it that draws you to this job and being a part of the library world?
The community. I like being on a first name basis with the patrons. Yeah, and I just love making life a little bit easier sometimes for people who need extra help.
So you mentioned that you end up finding things for yourself too when you're helping patrons with Reader's Advisory. And when we asked you to join us on the podcast today, what you said that you read a lot of and would like to talk about is short stories and poetry. Why don't you tell us a little bit, what's the draw for that for you? And is that primarily what you read?
Yeah, I read all kinds of stuff, but yeah, I mostly seek out poetry and short stories. I guess the draw for me is that with short stories, I get to see as many different scenes and as many different characters in one book as possible. With poetry, I feel like it's the art of being succinct in a way, and you really get the meat of the book.
I think it's interesting that you say that you like short stories because you get to see different characters and, read different stories from different perspectives, different settings, etc. Because usually I think a lot of people will sell a short story as it's a collection of stories that follow the same theme or might follow the same, similar cast of characters, but you like it for a very different reason, and that every story is slightly different in its own way, which I'm going to keep in mind while we discuss today so that I can kind of point out, that stands true to some of my favorite collections of short stories. 10 out of 10 agree with your thoughts on poetry. I love poetry because it's just straight to the point a lot of the times, even though it might be or layered underneath a lot of metaphor or figurative language. The root is right there always for you to find. And I think that that's such a fun reading experience for me, at least. Tessa, how do you feel about poetry? I don't think that that's a genre or a style that we've ever really talked about.
I had a heavy poetry era at the end of high school. I took a lot of creative writing classes in high school and really found a home with writing poetry. But as I left school and, grew up, I guess, I didn't read or write nearly as much. So I have a lot of dated poetry opinions, I guess you could say. I also sometimes have a hard time with more modern poetry. I just gotta find someone that I think is good, I think.
I felt like in high school, I read a lot of the classics, and that never really resonated with me. Actually, I think when I first started branching out and looking for more contemporary poetry, I found a book of poetry by Bob Dylan, and it's called Tarantula, and it's a book that he wrote in the 60s, and it's described as a journey through his imagination. So I feel like that tells you everything.
I think that my relationship with poetry is kind of merging your two relationships. In high school, it was a lot of studying the classic poetry, sonnets, just to kind of get a feel for it. And it wasn't something that I particularly enjoyed until I was in my graduate program and I took a poetry workshop and we focused a lot on contemporary poetry. And I was like, hold on, I really like this. So that's when I got into reading poetry more and writing poetry and seeing more of the value in it for what it was that I was writing about. And so it was really exciting to find that. It sort of fizzled out after I had completed my degree, but it's coming back again because I feel that I took a break from it and from writing. And now I'm like, wait a minute, I want to get back. I've got like things to say or ideas that I want to flesh out. And it's just so magical to fall in love with it again and to see what's out there in the world and of like contemporary poetry because I wasn't here for so long. I wasn't reading it. So to kind of find those new collections and enjoy them has been great. So I really loved that we did this for this episode.
When compiling my notes for this episode and trying to find what I wanted to read to be able to talk about it, it really just like brought that feeling of like when I was so into reading it and writing it back. And I was a little bit like, why did I leave this? So I'm very excited to hear what your recommendations and favorites are.
So there's an anthology that I really like called Girl-esque. It's an anthology of feminist poetry where femininity is performed in campy, kind of gross ways. I love anthologies because I've found a lot of writers through reading anthologies who I've really liked. Some of the poets who are in Girlesque are Catherine Wagner and Chelsea Minnis. And all of the poets in Girlesque are contemporary poets. And they just have really interesting writing styles. Like Chelsea Minnis, for example, uses form in interesting ways. She uses ellipses to the extreme. And sometimes that can be a little distracting from the poem, but I was reading an interview with her and she said the reason she does that is because she was often criticized for writing poetry that was too short, and so to lengthen it she just added an egregious amount of ellipses.
On a similar vein, I have a collection of poetry by Amy Gersler. It's Index of Women that I think both of you might enjoy. It is mostly prose poetry, which is my favorite style of poetry. Well, one of my favorite styles of poetry. And it's all like from the perspective of women, and it follows women growing up, women in their old age. It was just fun to read about different female perspectives at different points of their lives, different settings, and I really enjoyed it. So I would recommend. That was one I haven't read in a very long time. So if either one of you picks it up anytime soon, I'd love to hear your thoughts just so that I can kind of get a refresher.
Funny enough, a solid segue here. One of the collections that I read for this episode was How About Now by Kate Bayer. And that is a lot about marriage and parenting and like being a mother and how mothers are perceived in society, which is not it's not my lived experience at this time, but I did enjoy her way and style of writing it, and I know that she has a few other collections that are a little bit older, so she was younger, and I think that I might enjoy those more.
Is most of the poetry that you read written by female poets?
I don't know what it is, but I am just drawn to the female perspective. It's relatable to me. And there's another collection by Tess Gallagher. She has a collection called Is Not, and it's about exploring liminal spaces, a lot of in between, nature versus civilization, life versus death, stuff like that. I think one of my favorite poems is in this collection. It's called Blind Dog Seeing Girl, and the central theme is about navigating life through trial and error. And I love the way that she writes.
I also tend to lean towards poetry that is written by women. Again, just to echo you, like it's something that I relate to, regardless of like what the subject matter is, because this next one kind of deals a little bit with like motherhood, which is again like not something that I can personally relate to, but as a woman, it's something that, is discussed a lot around me and with people that I am friends with or my family, etc. Like it's something that's constantly a conversation. And it's actually, I think, probably my like top 3 favorite collection of poetry. And it is Teaching My Mother How to Give Birth by Worcestershire. And I just love this collection. It focuses on war, on being a woman, on feminism, and like injustices that women face in society. And there's one poem that is just 2 lines, so I'll share it. And I think that it sticks a lot with many readers because when I was like looking back at my notes and kind of what other people were saying too, this one came up a lot. And it's, "To my daughter, I will say, when men come, set yourself on fire." And it's just 2 lines, and there's so much there, which is what I just love about poetry. And poetry like this, especially, is just one of my favorites. I recommend to everyone.
I'll be a slight contrarian here. One of the collections that I read was The Bronze Arms by Richie Hoffman. So it is by a male poet, but it has an emphasis on being queer with a lot of connections to mythology, specifically Greek mythology. The difference in form and like stanza length and spacing was very different, whereas the Kate Bayer one I read was a little bit more straightforward. So that one was a lot of fun, and we've talked about it a lot on the podcast. We love mythology references and retellings, and I think putting the queer spin on it, because inherently mythology stuff, I would argue, is all very queer in my opinion. So it was heavy at times, but it was also a very good collection.
I think that poetry is a great place to be heavy, to have those heavy topics discussed because, again, you're hitting it. And this is sort of like maybe contrary a little bit, but you're simultaneously hitting it head on because of the length of the work, but it's shielded by, again, that figurative language. And so those heavy topics just come in and it makes for great poetry.
Yeah, I agree because it's stuff that we all experience. Like even the heavy stuff is sometimes, uncomfortable to read about, but at the same time, for me personally, reading heavy stuff during certain times has helped me heal and cope with heavy things I was experiencing in my life.
Yeah, I agree. Poetry is so inherently personal, whether you're writing from your specific point of view or just generally. And I think that it can feel very rewarding and healing to use as a coping mechanism because you do have to work for what the poem means and what the person who wrote it was thinking, but also what you as a reader are thinking because they are 2 different things.
Someone that I think does that in kind of mixing the personal but also making us work for it a little bit is Jason Reynolds. And he has a book that is a single poem and it's for everyone. I love that. That's another one of my all-time favorites. And it talks about like chasing this dream that you have. And so it feels like a very personal thing because everyone's has their own dream. And he certainly has his own dreams, achieving those dreams and the possibility of them. It's just a very cute poem. And I like that within that poem, he says, I've gifted this to you, so now gift it to someone else. And the whole purpose is like passing it, like paying it forward, passing this book along. So I have 2 copies on my shelf. So I obviously have to do that. I haven't done it yet, but I would love to like pass that dream-like poem to someone else.
Probably 2 of my favorite collections, both of them dealing with death. So the first one is called Obit by Victoria Chang, and all of the poems are written as obituaries. And typically, when writing poetry about death, people usually go to elegy, but I really thought that this was an interesting way of doing it. I think I read someone mentioned it was like making um it was a public acknowledgement of a private loss, which is like what obituaries are, but she starts the book with, I think the first poem is obituary for her father's frontal lobe after he had a stroke. So dealing with death, but not death. And then it ends with a poem about the Parkland shooting in Florida. So more of like a community type of grief. That whole book is just it's heavy, but it's really beautiful. Another collection that I really love is called The Father by Sharon Olds. It's a book about poetry about her father's illness, death, and the aftermath of it. And it's really zoned in on very specific things like the way his body looked after death. And someone on Goodreads said that they thought she should have just kept this collection as a diary because it does feel like diary entries. But I'm extremely glad that she published it because it was a helpful read for me when I was grieving my dad. So, and then like I don't know, it was just very specific. I felt like cuz sometimes even though grief is a universal experience, it can sometimes feel isolating. So I really appreciated that collection.
Yeah, that last one is pretty interesting to me. I love the death theme and like people dealing with grief in whether it's stories, poetry, essays, whatever it might be, just because everyone deals with it so differently, but it's just a universal emotion that we all feel at some point. So seeing it written on the page is always so interesting to me and one of my favorite emotions to see portrayed in poetry.
The Obit one sounds so good. Like going on an immediate TBR for me because I think that obituaries themselves are they're very weird. Like it's such a weird social norm that we are still doing, and I think it would be very interesting to like read in that style, like specifically you saying about like her father's frontal lobe and like those kinds of different ways you can view death. It sounds very, very interesting to me.
Yeah, it's that concept of like a little death or like a little, yeah, like a little death. Like when you sleep, that is a little death. So I like seeing it applied to other things.
I wrote down Tupac, Kendrick, and Little Kim. Okay, well, just a bit about how I really like rap music, and it is very poetic. I love reading the lyrics to rap songs.
I love that you said that because I've been holding this in this entire episode. Something about lyrics, that's poetry. Like that is poetry to me. So you bringing that up, Stephanie, thank you. Because for the longest time, I would print out lyrics and I would analyze them the way that I would analyze a poem. It's just so good. It's one of my favorite pastimes, and I wish that I had more time to do it now because there's so many good songs out there that are just so poetic.
Yeah, this is a very common occurrence in my life. Anytime me and my wife are in the car, she doesn't she has a very science analytical brain, and so sometimes literary things get lost on her, but she like has this intense need to know. So specifically this happened with The Great Divide by Noah Kahn because she simply couldn't make it work in her brain on what it was saying. So like literally line by line, I was having her pause it and like explaining. I mean, I'm not the end all be all of what that song is about, but what I interpreted each thing as, and this is a very common occurrence. So agree, it is poetry. If you take the music away from it and look at it, it's in stanzas.
But on the flip side, I will say I have such a hard time with celebrity poetry. And I don't want to be like, stay in your lane, like write lyrics. No, because like I can understand, as we just all agreed, that there's such, like, they're two sides of the same coin, song lyrics and poetry. But when an artist is writing only poetry, there's something lost there for me, but mainly just celebrity poetry in general. There's a couple that I can name, like Lana Del Rey's book of poetry. I don't know. I might have just read it on, like, I might have just, like, read it on a bad day because I like her music, I like her lyrics, but I was like, what is going on here? I'm not enjoying this. So that was a letdown for me. But one person I think that did a decent job.
Is it Halsey?
No, I didn't read Halsey's yet.
Hers is fine.
Okay, I didn't read hers
It's
yet.
not Megan Fox.
Okay, good.
But it's not the best thing I've ever read.
The person I was gonna say is Lily Reinhart. I actually didn't hate hers. Like it was decent for the expectations that I went in with it. Is it my all-time favorite thing? No. Is it like a 5-star book of poetry? No. But she talks a lot about anxiety and relationships and breakups that I thought was interesting, especially when I tried really hard to take away like who she is. Yeah, it was definitely enjoyable.
I'd like to mention one celebrity who just came out with a poetry book, but he also has a few novels out, I think, and he's got a PhD in English, I'm pretty sure. But that's David Duchovny. He just wrote a poetry, or came out with a poetry collection called About Time. And I read it. I didn't mind it. I didn't love it, but it was pretty good. It's about fatherhood mostly and life. But yeah, his writing is really well done.
There's one more sort of like segue into poetry that I wanted to mention before we move on to short stories, and that was the importance of setting in poetry that I think that sometimes people might forget about, but it's always there, like kind of lurking in the background. And there are so many great Palestinian poets that do this, that incorporate Palestine, Palestinian culture, and the Palestinian dysphoria into their poems. One of them that I'm currently reading is The Moon That Turns You Back. I think that it's just a beautiful collection. Again, it's written by a woman, Hala Elian. I think that she does a fantastic job at showcasing what it means to be a woman that is not growing up in her family's like native space, and how you carry on those traditions and that culture, being away from that place. Another poet that I think does this very well is Muhammad al-Kurd, and he wrote Rifqa, which I think is an excellent collection of poems. He is a huge Palestinian advocate, and he just wrote a nonfic title as well that is on my TBR, but I would 10 out of 10 recommend both of those.
Another person that I want to mention is Ocean Vuong. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, while it is prose, reads like a poem in its entirety because Ocean Vuong is primarily a poet. Also the collection Night Sky with Exit Wounds. I haven't read that in a very long time, but I can still like remember reading it and feeling like it's very visceral, but I would recommend. They do have a new book out that is prose, I believe, that I haven't read, but On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. If you read prose and you want to get more into poetry but you're not sure if you'll like it, I feel like it's a good one to bridge the gap, but also the other way around. If you read a lot of poetry and want to be reading a little bit more fiction, it can go both ways.
I think that that's a perfect segue for us to get into short stories, because again, you just get that little short snippet of this world the same way that you would get a shorter snippet of a world or a theme in a poem. And I gotta say, I love a short story collection. What is it about short stories that you are drawn to, Stephanie?
I was thinking about this earlier, and I definitely read more short story collections than I do novels. And it's made me think if maybe I have a short attention span because I'm jumping from scene to scene, different characters. Although I've found myself reading short story collections, starting with the first story and then transitioning into the second story, but my mind still thinks that the characters I just read are a part of this new story. So sometimes I will just space out how I read short stories. So I have this, I don't recommend this collection necessarily, but there's a writer, his name is Simon Rich. When I was in high school, I was a really big comedy nerd and I subscribed to the Harvard Lampoon. And so I would get copies of those.
Wow, I didn't know that people actually.
I have no affiliation to Harvard whatsoever. Yeah, I was reading a lot of The Onion and the Harvard Lampoon, so it's very short form scene type of stuff. So Simon Rich he was the editor in chief of the Harvard Lampoon. He published a short story collection called Ant Farm, and it is just like a bunch of tiny little scenes. This came out in I think the mid 2000s and it hasn't aged well, but I think this writer has grown. I think he is currently a writer for SNL. But that, and then there's another collection called My Custom Van by Michael Ian Black, who's also a comedian. And those are more humorous essays, short stories. So that's, I guess, where I started reading short form stuff.
Yeah, I want to just reiterate again, I didn't know that people actually subscribe to the Harvard Lampoon
Probably only me. And maybe parents of
of the writers.
the writers who
But I think it's really cool. I mean, I wish that I think I guess now I am because I will subscribe to things that are in my realm or like with social media now it's easier to kind of get the articles like, that you're interested in just sort of spit out at you. That was not the introduction I was expecting. And so I love that. And now I know like a fun fact about you, which is really great. But I think that going back to what you said about the attention span thing, for me, short stories really, if I'm feeling some sort of slump or I can't get into a book or nothing is working, I lean towards a short story collection because it's that instant gratification. Like, oh, just finished this. It's like just finishing a chapter, but the story is wrapped up in some way. And so it feels like a little reward or treat to have made progress in this larger collection.
Oh yeah, definitely. That resonates. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but you like unlikable characters. I do too. I feel like unlikable characters are real people. Have you read anything by Otessa Moshfegh?
She did my year of rest and relaxation.
Correct.
I actually ended up DNFing it.
Oh no.
Yeah. No, I think it really just wasn't the right time for me. I have to be in a certain mindset of like needing a grimy girl fiction book. And I think I got like maybe 40% in and it wasn't clicking. Something wasn't working. But I do want to try more by her.
Well, she has a collection called Homesick for Another World. This is a short story collection. I didn't like it as much as My Year of Rest and Relaxation, but she does have some pretty gnarly characters in Homesick for Another World. So give that one a try.
Unlikable characters are my bread and butter. So I'm sold on that one.
There's another collection that I really like called Female Trouble by Antonia Nelson. There's a lot of dark humor in it, a lot of messy portrayals of relationships and identity and womanhood set in the Midwest. Lots of blue collar characters in there. I really enjoyed it. It deals with some heavy topics, but I'm really drawn to that stuff because I feel like that's just a part of life.
Do you prefer short story collections that have like a thread through them that's pretty obvious, or something that is more of a, not Mod Podge, but like very differing narratives?
I think it, yeah, probably depends on my mood. I'd say both. I don't know if I have a preference for either.
I don't know that it's necessarily a preference, but I find that a lot of the collections that I have read end up having a more central thread because I simply can't go through a podcast episode without bringing up Eric LaRocca.
I don't have a single Eric LaRocca on my list because I knew that you would have Eric LaRocca on yours.
Two that I'm thinking about the most here, which a lot of my short stories are horror. I find that, like, that I have to talk about today. I find that horror works really well in short form for me because I don't expect an explanation for a lot of the horror short stories the way I would if it was like a full-length novel. But the two Eric LaRocca that I wanted to bring up were They Were Here Before Us, which I think the subtitle for that is A Novella in Pieces. I'm not sure. But it follows, it has like an animal through line in it. And then The Trees Grew Because I Bled There is another one that has a more like nature thread throughout it. Both of them are very gross, as with all of the times I bring him up. If you don't like gore, probably don't try it.
I like going in knowing, okay, all of these stories are going to focus on this theme because it gets my mind thinking about that theme and looking for it in each story, especially if it's a collection of short stories by different authors, like an anthology, because then I'm like, okay, how is every single one of these writers taking this idea and presenting it in their own way? One that both Tessa and I recently read was A Darker Shade of Noir, and it is an anthology of women's horror written by many different well-known authors: Margaret Atwood, Joyce Carol Oates, Tanana Reeve Dew, and it was a 5-star short story collection for me, which means that most, if not all, short stories were 5-star reads. It was excellent.
It was a 5-star for me as well. There were some stories that I liked more than others, but there was no story within it that I was like, okay. Like finishing all of them, I was like, oh, okay, yeah. We both listened to it on audio, and that was another thing about short stories that I wanted to say. I do like to listen to short stories or short story collections on audio. Any problems I might have with an audiobook of a full-length novel are like squashed when it's so short. I don't have to worry about my attention wandering. I can listen to it in one sitting. It's never going to take me too long to get through at least one of the stories. Whereas like in a traditional novel, I might finish a chapter, but that doesn't mean that like what's going on has actually wrapped up. So I like them in audio form.
Tend to lean towards short stories in audio form as well, which is different for poetry. I do not ever do poetry on audio, which is crazy because a lot of people will say that poetry is meant to be read aloud, which I totally understand. But I need to do it in my own voice if I'm going to be reading it aloud. So yeah, that's my preference for sure. Stephanie, do you mostly read or do audio? Or
I completely agree with you. And I've been to a few poetry readings, and I don't enjoy hearing the poetry as much as I enjoy reading the poetry. I can't even do poetry on ebook. It has to be on paper for some reason. I only listen to nonfiction. I don't like reading on I don't really like ebooks much. I like to annotate a lot in my books. So usually I'll read I'll rent the book from the library, and if I love it, I'll buy it and then I'll mark it up. And it's just fun for me to go back and see where I've written things down and made notes in my books.
one short story collection that I sort of did that with recently was like physically reading it and then taking notes, was The Perils of Girlhood. And this is a memoir and essays. So It's essays, not short stories. It's nonfiction, but I still wanted to bring it up.
It counts.
Thank you. That's what I needed. Because they're not in chronological order, it reads a lot like short stories. And I really enjoyed it. I love a good memoir, and having it written in this structure, it felt like I was waiting for Easter eggs to pop up in future stories because you don't have the full context of a story because it's not in chronological order. So things will pop up again as we see our author jump through different ages and stages of her life. And it's also sort of like a letter to her daughter, which I think is great, as her daughter is, I think, like a teenager now, and so she's sharing these stories with her and this advice with her. I really enjoyed it, and I think that you guys would too, based off of this conversation. And I think it is on audio too now. It should be, at least.
Cool. I added it to my TBR. It does look like something I'd want to read though, physically. I want to go back to what you asked me earlier about whether or not I like reading short stories that have a theme or not. And I was looking at my list, and one of my favorite short story collections is called Self-Help by Lori Moore. And it's modeled after self-help books. The first story in it, which might be my favorite, is called How to Be the Other Woman. And it's written in second person narration, so you are the other woman, you are the character in all of these stories. So it's just a really fun read, and she's also got a dark sense of humor, which I'm a sucker for.
I love that. Immediately added to the TBR. All you had to say was second person POV, and I was sold. Let's do a little round robin of short story recommendations. I've got my pen at the ready for my TBR to grow substantially. Tessa, if you want to start us off.
I have a lot of like singular short stories that I want to talk about, but one collection is Mystery Lights by Lena Valencia. And it's categorized as horror, but I would say they read more Black Mirror-esque. I think the whole book is I think it's like sub 300 pages. So all of the stories are pretty quick. I read the entire thing in one night, could not stop reading it. And I don't really see people talking about it. So if you like that kind of almost dystopian feel without it being like too intense, I would definitely recommend it.
My recommendation is Stag Dance by Tori Peters. I loved this. I got an ARC when we went to Lib Learn X a couple years back, and I did it on audio. It was great. It's about 4 stories that focus on gender and gender identity, and the title story is pretty long. I think it's the longest story in that collection, but I really enjoyed it. I think that all of them have this sort of almost sinister vibe to them, and it was really interesting. I didn't want to put it down while I was reading. So I will be reading Tori Peters' other work, Detransition Baby, as soon as I can.
My second favorite short story collection by Lydia Davis. It's called Break It Down. Lydia Davis writes almost microfiction. She's got a story in this collection called What She Knew, which is not even a page long, but it's mighty. There's themes of identity crisis, body dysmorphia, alienation in it, and it's quite funny. There's also another story in there called A Few Things Wrong with Me, and it's the narrator analyzing why someone might break up with her. Always laugh out loud when I read Lydia Davis. She's definitely one of my favorites.
Now that we have a vibe for types of short stories or poetry collections that you enjoy and things that you recommend, I think Tessa and I are going to go out on a limb, and we are going to give you some recommendations of short stories or poems or collections that we think you might enjoy.
Yes, please. Thank you.
I'm not gonna lie, my first one is maybe a short story, maybe a novella. But from what you've said about heavier topics, grief, loss, things like that, I would really recommend And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Frederick Bachman. It's the same author as Beartown, but this story focuses on a grandfather and a grandson, and the grandfather has dementia. And first of all, it made me like ugly cry. Second of all, the way and like creativity behind representing like the loss of memory and forgetting and not really understanding that you're forgetting, it was really, really good. So if you haven't read it, I would recommend it.
Oh yeah. I could already tell this is gonna wreck me, but I love it.
Yeah, like full ugly cry. It was bad.
Yes, I love a book that makes me ugly cry. Then I get to send Tessa so many videos. It's one of the small joys I have in this world. My recommendation is Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory by Raphael Bob Waksberg, the creator of BoJack Horseman. I loved this. I think that it was really, really funny. It's a classic tragic comedy, so I would recommend it to anyone that likes the death, grief theme with some of that dark humor. It was a really good look at love, friendship, breakups, and just an all around good time in the worst way possible.
Wow, you guys are really nailing it. I'm so excited to read both of these. They sound really good.
I was kind of surprised that you hadn't already read Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory. When I said it out loud, I was like, probably already read it. All right, yes, a win is a win.
I don't know if do you like horror?
I like Goosebumps.
Again, I don't know what we would classify this as. I'm going with just a short fiction vibe right now, okay? Okay. I would recommend This Is Where We Talk Things Out by Caitlin Marceau. If you have mommy issues, though, maybe don't read it. This woman is estranged from her mother. Her mother calls her back to this home. She doesn't really want to go. She has to go. It's like the definition of making the world's worst decisions and then being surprised when it doesn't work out for you. But it's horror, but it's more an internal thing than like super gory.
You know them. You love them. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. I love this collection of short stories so much. It's one of my favorites. Follows a group of Black women in the South who go to the same church, who are part of the same community, and it talks about sexism, feminism, infidelity, religion, all in one. It's excellent. My favorite is Preach Cobbler, and so I really need you to tell me your thoughts after you finish that one. I'm so excited for this author's upcoming debut novel, full length, because the writing was just excellent. So can't wait to see what they do with a full length novel.
I think for our last round, we're going to go a little bit oddball, and who knows if you would actually like these, but we're going to take a chance. For me, I'm going to recommend The Knight and the Butcher Bird by Alex E. Harrow. It is a very well done and succinct fantasy story where there's a storyteller who is actively trying to keep a knight away from the specific story. It is very well fleshed out and wraps up very nicely, and I think it's a good way to dip your toes into fantasy if you wanted to. Regardless, the characters are good. There's a slight line of romance, and I think it's like less than 100 pages.
Yeah, that's a great rec. I don't read much. I haven't read much fantasy in my whole life. So this might be a good intro to that.
I'm putting a lot at stake here with my last one, and that phrase will make sense soon. But it's Hot for Slayer by Allie Hazelwood, and it follows a vampire slayer who loses his memory and ends up in the care of the vampire that he has been hunting for centuries. It is a paranormal romance, so I don't know if that's your speed, but It's a short story. Allie Hazelwood is one of the top writers in her genre, and she really kills it with this one. It's fun, it's light, while still being interesting, and it's less than 100 pages, so you don't really have much to lose here if you don't enjoy it, but I think that it's kind of a nice little way to end this episode. Something a little fun.
Thanks for all the recommendations. I'm looking forward to checking these out.
Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I feel like we got to talk about a lot of forms of literature and different recommendations that we don't usually talk about, which is always what we're looking for with a guest. But I feel like this one was very different in a very good way.
Tessa and I have both added a bunch to our TBRs, and hopefully you've added some to yours as well. And it was a pleasure having you on the podcast, and can't wait to get back out on desk with you. And now for our final segment, our book talk. This month, Tessa and I set out to read Gunk, and it didn't go so well. We tried twice, I think.
Yeah.
Got about 10% into it on audiobook. And 10% is a pretty large amount since it's only a 4-hour audiobook. And we decided to DNF.
Collectively.
Yes.
We were listening to it together at the same time twice, and it just didn't work.
Didn't stick, but luckily I was wrapping up A Darker Shade of Noir, and I listened to a couple stories with Tessa, who then went back and listened to the beginning ones, and we both really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I know we touched on it earlier in the episode, but all of these stories, I don't feel like there was a dud. Like it was hit after hit after hit. I would say one of the top ones for me is Metapsychosis. That one, I don't want to tell you anything about what it's about, because to be just like dropped in that story was truly unlike anything else I think I've ever had happen.
Yeah, that one also goes down in the books as one of my favorites. It's just so good, so different. Really loved that. I also really loved Concealed Carry. I think that was bringing up a lot of contemporary issues that we need to be discussing, and to do it through a horror lens. Perfect. Love to see it. And Gross Anatomy, the only one told through a male perspective, and it
could only be told through a male perspective, truly.
Exactly. But yeah, those are just a few of the ones that I enjoyed. But to reiterate, the whole collection is fantastic.
Yeah, if you take one thing from this, is please try this. And I think we would both really recommend it on audio.
That wraps up today's episode. Our next book talk is going to be on Pet by Ikweke Emeze. I've read a few of their work, and I'm very excited to try out Pet. It's been on the TBR for a minute, I think for you too, Tessa. And so we're both excited to discuss that. I think it's going to go very well.
We need that. We need the win.
We do. Yeah, we need the win for this next book talk. As usual, if you have any questions, recommendations, or anything you'd like to see us discuss, let us know at podcast@greenhillslibrary.org.
Thank you guys so much for listening. This has been episode 20, Long Story Short. I'm Tessa.
I'm Sarah, and we're checked out.